You're watching Morning Live. Thanks for being with us. Now, it's emerged that former President Jacob Zuma slammed the ANC top six in their virtual meeting 2 weeks ago. And that's according to a 23-page document on Zuma's speaking notes, which was released on social media. Zuma accused the party's top brass of not being genuine in their attempt to convince him to appear before the state capture inquiry, saying they had to create a show for his detractors. Now, the Zoom meeting took place after Zuma publicly defied a constitutional court ruling instructing him to appear before the inquiry. Zuma also said that he could not meet with President Cyril Ramaphosa because he didn't know if Ramaphosa was supporting him or not, and thus could not discuss sensitive matters with the president. So to help us unpack some of these latest developments around the African National Congress, we're joined by political analyst Aubrey Matshiqi. Aubrey, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thomas.
So let's just start with the latest developments. Any surprises? Because even before these notes were released on social media, there were some rumors that this was a very heated meeting between the ANC top six and the former president.
Well, in the first place, former President Jacob Zuma was never going to be persuaded by the top six or anyone to change his mind about going to this Zondo commission. The question is, why did he agree to a meeting with the top six leadership of the ruling party? Well, the first reason that might be put forward is that he was acting as a disciplined member of the party, and therefore was acting in respect or with respect because the leadership had called for such a meeting. But secondly, it was an opportunity for him to state his views about what he thought about the leadership. If my own information is anything to go by, he had a lot to say about the president of the party, President Cyril Ramaphosa. In fact, according to my own information, he projected the president of the ANC as one of those who are part of this political conspiracy against him that he keeps on talking about. In fact, I am told that at some point he accused what he said was evidence that the president of the ANC had been going around saying things about him as part of this campaign to undermine him. And my information suggests that the president of the ANC obviously denied all of this. I'm also informed that there was some crying in that meeting, but I'm not going to say which of the people who were in the meeting were crying.
So let's take all of that and look at the African National Congress and where this places, I apologize, where this places the party in actual fact. Because Mr. Zuma, former president, also states in that letter, and just to quote a bit from it, he says, Mr. President, your letter commits the cardinal error of implicating the ANC in matters that we as leaders and those deployed in the state must account to point your sharp at the entire ANC and its ordinary working class members is rather low and disappointing, to say the least. So that gives us a sense of how the former president feels. But one of the things that stood out in that 23-page letter for me was former President Zuma still referring to the African National Congress as a liberation movement. What should we read into all of this?
Well, I have no problem at all with any member of the ANC referring to the ANC as a liberation movement, because there is this argument that the ANC is failing to transition from being a liberation movement to being a modern political party. To me, that is just mere dogma. The challenge facing the ANC is that it has a complex identity, and that complex identity consists of different dimensions, including the fact that it is part liberation movement, that by law it has no choice but to be a modern parliamentary party, It is part social movement. There's a time after or before the 2009 election when it was the most effective opposition party in the country. So the challenge is not for the ANC to transition from being a liberation movement to a modern parliamentary political party. The challenge is whether it can manage the different dimensions of its complex identity when those different dimensions of its complex identity come into a conflict. Because what we must bear in mind, members of the ANC, particularly those who are in leadership, do recognize that the ANC has a complex identity and therefore has different dimensions. And what they try to do is to rely on whatever part of this complex identity that is going to advance their interests. Therefore, the challenge facing the ANC is to harmonize the relationship between the complex dimensions of its identity.
Well, is the ANC able to do that, to harmonize the different sections of this broad church, given what we are seeing?
Well, it isn't, because you have those who want to position the ANC narrowly as a liberation movement. You have those who want to position the ANC narrowly as a modern parliamentary party. And there are those who want to rely on their access to state power to influence the configuration of the balance of support and the balance of forces inside the party. And all of this have come into conflict. The problem here is that while you have, I think, those who support President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Tumamina faction slightly ahead when it comes to the balance of forces and the balance of support within the ruling party. That coincides with the fact that the president still presides over a party that is in a state of decline. And because it is in a state of decline, he and those who support him and his opponents, that is the ANC as a whole, are failing to harmonize the relationship between these different dimensions of his complex identity.
So the ANC has, over time, always had this task of making sure that they actually keep this broad church intact. When you had members of the movement in exile, some were exiled in the country, others were on Robben Island, etc. But looking at the state of the party right now, has it ever been weaker?
Well, I don't think it has ever been weaker. And I will repeat what I've said before. I don't think in Cyril Ramaphosa it has ever had, for subjective and objective reasons, a leader this weak. As I say, for both objective and subjective reasons.
Let's unpack that. Let's unpack that.
Well,
what makes him a weak leader?
Well, objectively, there is an extent to which it is not up to him to deal with the ANC state of decline, partly because he is a product of that decline, partly because when he is elected in Nazareth, he's elected on a very slim mandate. And therefore, that has had the effect of arresting the extent to which he can impose his political authority and his moral authority on the party. And therefore, there's a degree to which he cannot govern, he cannot make certain decisions without the consent of his opponents and enemies within the ANC. But the weakness has occurred also because of his subjective weaknesses as a leader. But what is interesting for me is what was said by Enoch Godongwa, I think about 2 weeks ago, when he was opining about the current state of the ANC. And he reminded ANC members that the struggle against apartheid was about the transfer of power from the apartheid state to the people. And then he said that if the ANC, which is in possession of this people's power, is not deploying that power effectively or even correctly, the people must recalibrate their relationship with the ANC. In other words, they must discard it. Now, that took me back to 2007, when the former president of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, right at the height of the Zuma-Mbeki factional dynamic, used the phrase fewer but better. In other words, speaking to the possibility that if there must be a cure to that which ails the ANC, it is better that as members of the ANC there are fewer if the majority has left, because it refuses to submit to revolutionary discipline. I think what Enoch Botongana is highlighting or signaling is some level of preparedness for a split. In other words, it is either those who support the Tumamina faction who must split from this ANC, or it is their opponents, the so-called radical economic transformation forces, who must split from the ANC. But where I think he is wrong is the idea that after apartheid, power was transferred from the apartheid state to the people, and therefore to the ANC. In my view, it is the illusion of power that was transferred from the apartheid state to the ANC or the people. And therefore, the factional battles they are having in the ANC are fights over the illusion of power. But access even to that illusion of power gives them access to state resources. And to some extent, the decline has occurred because of a change in the relationship between the ANC and state power, even if it is in the context of an illusory transfer of power from the apartheid state to the people.
And I do believe that begs some further extrapolation, because when we talk about the illusion of power being handed over, what does that mean? Are we talking about economic powers solely? Who then benefited from that illusion? And also, looking forward in terms of the decline of the ANC, many would ask today, if you look at the ANC's own ideological stance in terms of the membership that it espouses to, how many of the ANC members from the leadership down to rank and file would actually pass through the proverbial eye of the needle?
Well, I don't think the ANC at the moment can be accused of having an ideological stance. I think that would be grossly unfair. But what we see in terms of that illusion of power is a disjuncture between the vision that the ANC fought for. It is a vision of a post-apartheid South Africa that would be the antithesis of apartheid South Africa in its social, political, economic, gender, class, and other relations. Now, the extent to which post-apartheid South Africa, particularly in economic terms, is the antithesis of apartheid South Africa is minute. In other words, the dominant relations, particularly the main social contradiction, that of race, is more or less what it was during apartheid. So transfer of power, amongst other things, should have been about the reconfiguration of the structure of the economy to give effect to the imperative of ameliorating the lived reality of those who were victims of apartheid and colonialism. This is not what is happening. Second, what is the dominant worldview? I keep on saying that the dominant worldview, the ways of seeing, the ways of being in South Africa today are those of the cultural majority. But this cultural majority, as I keep on saying, is a numerical minority. And the numerical majority that the ANC purports to defend, whose interests it purports to advance, has become the cultural minority. And therefore, if we look at it in another way also, that South Africa does not belong to all who live in it. It still belongs very much so to those who conquered it. What then we have is an illusory transfer of power from the apartheid state to the people. In fact, what we have today is a neo-apartheid state.
Well, Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi, can we call this halftime? Because we have to pause here to say goodbye to our SABC2 viewers, but not before we read a few of the tweets to our question of the day. And then we will continue this conversation with Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi after the 8 a.m. news.